what's up? It is Dan from the FatLossNinja.com and 6MinuteSuperhuman.com. I have a very special friend with me here today, a fellow Torontonian, and one thing I have to say is actually his kids.
Uncle Dan.
This man's kids are little monsters, okay? And I say that in the most loving sense. But yeah, this is my boy Chris Lopez, and
Hey guys.
yeah. So Chris, we're here to talk kettlebells, and before we do that, let everybody know exactly what your story is.
Okay, so I'm what's called an SFG level 2 kettlebell trainer. SFG is a Strong First Giriya kettlebell trainer. Strong First is, if you're familiar with the RKC and with Pavel, Strong First is his new organization. And under that organization, I have a level 2 designation. And I am one of only, I think, 3 in Canada, in all of Canada,
Yes.
which I'm very proud of. And so, and like Dan said, I've got children. I've got many. I've got 5 actually. I'm also known on the interwebs as Fit and Busy Dad, or the Fit and Busy Dad. And so people ask me questions about numerous things, about kettlebell training. And well, I started training with kettlebells because I've got a large family and I didn't have a lot of time, and that's kind of how I got into it. So I get questions about that. I get questions about parenting. I get questions about nutrition and all things like that. So that's pretty much my story. I've been a trainer for 15 years, been doing it for a long time, like right out of college or right out of university. I started training, and it's more or less a lifestyle for me than anything else. It's something that I try to kind of instill the value of fitness and of health to my kids and my family.
Yeah, and you do a very good job of that, I have to say. Yeah, you have some amazing kids. As even though they're little monsters, you have amazing kids. One thing I have to say is that because I own a gym, kettlebells are a big part of what we do in the training, especially when we're trying to transform people's lives. But at the same time, there's something missing. There are a lot of misconceptions about how to do kettlebell training, and if you can touch upon a lot of the misconceptions about it and a lot of the mistakes people commonly make.
Yeah, for sure. A big misconception that kettlebell training will hurt your back. And I mean, truth be told, anything will hurt your back. I mean, if you go down and you tie your shoes and you bend the wrong way, that could hurt your back. So as long as you're doing things properly, and we'll talk about this because kettlebell training is a skill, then you won't injure your back. In fact, kettlebell training, specifically the swing, will help your back because it'll build endurance and strength at the same time if you're doing the swing. Now, that's probably the biggest mistake that I see people make is with the kettlebell swing. They think that it's a squat, so it's almost like a squat and a front raise for your shoulder. So the kettlebell really only lands in between your heels and then it comes straight up, and it's almost like in a vertical type of plane. But what people don't understand is that it is a hip hinge pattern. So you liken it more to like a deadlift than you would a squat, which means that your shins remain vertical and you're trying to flex at your hips or bend at the hips as deeply as you can and not so much bend at your knees. Your knees can bend a little bit, but a lot of it comes from, or the movement comes from, using your posterior chain or loading your posterior chain, which would be your glutes and your hamstrings. So when you're doing a kettlebell swing, you should feel a good stretch in your glutes and your hamstrings before you go into that full powerful extension and driving it up. And I was telling one of our friends that the kettlebell provides a lot of feedback. So if you're doing a kettlebell swing and you find that when it comes up, it's drooping down, so the handle is above the level of the bell itself, then that means that you're probably doing the kettlebell swing wrong because your swing is very squatty because gravity's taking that bell. Whereas if you're doing a hinge swing the right way, then the kettlebell will provide feedback in the sense that it'll be flung out to the horizon, or it'll even flip up a little bit. So that's how you know that you're exploding through your hips and that you're getting that kettlebell further back enough. So the analogy that I like to use is you want to try to think of punching a hole in the wall with your butt when you're swinging a kettlebell, so that you get your butt as far back as you can, and when you extend your hips, then the kettlebell will give you that feedback and drive that to the
One thing I like to say is when I tell the girls at my gym to do a swing, I tell them to pretend as if you're punching someone in the face with your crotch. Is that kind of...
Yeah. That's the finish, right?
Yes.
So you're getting that explosive hip hinge, and you're clenching your butt, and you're blocking out your quads, and you're bracing your abs, and you're in that moment of Your body is in that moment of stillness where you're floating the bell up. And that's excellent feedback, because that's exactly what you're supposed to be doing.
One thing I want to ask you, and I believe that all power actually resonates from the bottom up. And when I see people doing kettlebell swings, the foot placement
Yeah.
is actually where a lot of people get it wrong. Can you touch upon that and tell us exactly what they have to do?
One of the best ways that I try to get people to make sure that they've got good foot placement is if you just simply stand up and you jump up and you land and you look down, that's your ideal kettlebell swing stance. Now that's for a single kettlebell. So if you're using one kettlebell with two hands or one kettlebell with one hand, then that's your ideal stance. That's almost like what we call, I'm a coach as well, and that's what we call the athletic position, because that's your ideal stance from when you landed. And just going based on that, at the top of your swing, you want to stay rooted to the ground, which means that no part of your foot should leave the ground. And if we want to get a little bit deeper into that, you want to feel the energy of the ground come from your feet up through the top of your head, through the kettlebell, and then back down through. I mean, it gets a little frou-frou and a little zen, but that's exactly what you want to feel. You want to feel the energy of the ground, and that's where punching a hole or punching somebody in the face with your crotch comes into play, because at that moment of stillness where you're just you're still, then that's the point where you want to feel the energy. That's the point where you really want to feel rooted to the ground. So your feet need to stay in place, and they've got to be in the right position when you're swinging, which means not necessarily straight, but your toes are slightly flared and but you're in a good ideal athletic position.
So obviously kettlebells, big component to a lot of gyms today. You've probably seen it in your own gym. If you don't go to mine, then you've probably seen it in some other gym. But then you probably look at it and you're like, what am I supposed to do with this thing?
Right.
You know, what is the biggest benefit to training with a kettlebell?
I think it's its versatility.
Yeah.
I mean, people only loop kettlebells into the conditioning category. I'm going to do 100 swings. I'm going to do 200 swings. I'm going to do 100 snatches. But it's so much more than that. And because I like to use strength as a tool to be able to gain fat loss. Strength is a skill, especially with the kettlebell, and you want to be able to harness that skill and practice that skill as often as you can. And the more you practice it, the better your body will become at it, the more efficient you'll get at it, and the more your body will change as you start to become an expert at that skill. So if I'm talking about even stuff like the swing, I mean, you can get very strong swinging a heavy kettlebell 10 times. I mean, if you just did 10 swings with a 48 kilogram kettlebell, how strong would you be? 48 kilograms is like 108 pounds, right? Yeah. And so it's not so much just focusing on the high repetition aspect of kettlebell training like you would see in like CrossFit or what people normally associate kettlebell training with. But there's a very good strength and power aspect to it that really people need to understand to be able to progress in their training.
Yeah, well, I mean, I always say that, you know, to get into your leanest shape possible, to actually look the way that you want to look, to have that look of an athlete, you actually have to train like an athlete.
Exactly.
And when you're doing these conditioning swings, you're not necessarily training for power whatsoever. You're training for more muscular endurance than anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of weird. It's kind of counterintuitive to what a lot of people think. But yeah, man. What else can you tell people about kettlebells to kind of like eke them towards at least trying them out in the safest way possible?
The most important thing is to really nail that hip hinge pattern down, because with that hip hinge pattern, that is the foundational movement to any other kettlebell ballistic exercise that you're going to do. So making sure that you've got a vertical shin angle, which means that your shins are straight up and down, your shin shouldn't be traveling, or your knee shouldn't be traveling over your toes when you're swinging a kettlebell. Making sure that you understand the difference between spine flexion and hip flexion, which means that when you're swinging a kettlebell, your spine is essentially fused. It's one unit. You're not leaking any energy. You know that your spine is a bunch of little joints that if you move any one of those joints, you start to leak energy. Well, you don't want to leak energy. We want to try to move the least amount of joints as possible. So we want to make sure that we're getting massive hip flexion. And then swinging a kettlebell, or kettlebell training in general, is great for your abs, great for your core, because you've got to manage that weird looking weight throughout the duration of the set. And so making sure that your abs are nice and tight, especially at the top of a swing or a snatch or even a clean, is really important. That'll work your abs really well. And I mean, you don't do crunches. We don't do crunches anymore because we know that that doesn't work for ab training. Kettlebell swings are a great way to really train your abs as well.
Yeah. So yeah, we're gonna go back to playing with Chris's little monsters right now, and Chris, it was awesome talking to you today, man. We're gonna explode on that. We're gonna explode.
Oh, we are.
Boom. Yeah, there you go. And yeah, you know what? Where can he find you?
Kettlebellworkouts.com is where you can find a myriad of kettlebell information, both from me and from some of the best experts in the world. And then if you want a little bit of what I'm doing personally with my workouts or interviewing experts like Dan and stuff like that, then you can find me on fitandbusydad.com.
Awesome. This is Dan from thefatlostninja.com. And gotta thank Chris again for doing this. This was awesome content. Some of the best stuff I've ever heard about kettlebells in a very long time. And yeah, we will talk to you soon. Take care. Peace out.
See you guys.